everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Yachna and I'm your host for the day. We are joined with Greg, who's from Avanti Prep, and he has a amazing introduction and the presentation planned for us. We'll be doing the Columbia interview prep today. And thank you again, Greg, for joining us. I'll hand it over to you. And I
Thank
know
you,
you're
Gary. Go
joining us,
ahead.
so if you want to take few seconds before we start, it's up to you.
Sure. No, I appreciate the warm welcome, and it's great to be back here on GMAT Club, now celebrating our 10th year of partnership. Avanti Prep and GMAT Club started back in 2017. It's been a very fast decade. I guess they all are, especially the older you get. But pleasure to be back here live with you all from GMAT Club and you all in attendance, and those who watch later on YouTube, here to talk about the Columbia Business School CBS interview prep here in what's really a big interview prep month, February, for round two. Without further ado, we could jump into the presentation. We'll just go through a few slides. I think we'll try to focus most of our attention on Columbia-specific questions to the extent we can. Without further ado, so look, some of the one of the taglines I have on this slide is mastering the differences between schools' interview styles, formats, and question patterns. And that actually comes from a presentation I did for GMAT Club, a video presentation I did for GMAT Club last year, which is available separately on YouTube. It focused on 8 or so schools. But that, I think, is, and it's very apropos here for Columbia, one of the biggest things you can do ahead of any school's interview prep, but perhaps especially something like CBS. So Columbia Business School fits into a pretty traditional MBA interview pattern, I would say, in the aggregate. It's a pretty typical MBA interview. It's not the HBS interview. It's not the Stanford interview. It's not the Wharton team-based discussion. It fits, for the most part, into a pretty traditional MBA interview question set, but we can still identify patterns and tendencies, and you can still orient your preparation accordingly by taking a closer look and going through some of the questions. That's what we will focus on, among other things, today. Just a little bit quickly about Avanti Prep. We are a top-rated boutique MBA admissions consulting firm. I mentioned we've been partnering with GMAT Club since 2017. We obviously invite you to go ahead and read our reviews and Google us and check out the reviews on GMAT Club or Poets and Quants, different kind of top consultant lists that we're fortunate to make many years running. I should say that our interview prep, you'll get maybe a little bit of a taste of it in a short video like this. We'll do questions at the end, by the way, so feel free to add them in the comment area, and then we could come to those at the end. But our interview prep is very high touch, very school specific, and very you specific. I think a lot of the interview prep that you'll find, out in the marketplace, it might be like a 30-minute mock interview and then 30 minutes of feedback, or 30-minute mock interview and 45 minutes of feedback. We, a lot of times, will spend 3 hours on a single interview prep session. Maybe we'll break that into 2 calls. We have clients who sign up to do 6 hours of interview prep with us for the first school that they interview on. And I'm not trying to, push people toward doing more per se. The point is, though, that when we do interview prep with applicants, it is very often true kind of question design, response outlining, response workshopping. After we practice it together or we do a mock, then of course we're going to refine it. We will often spend, so forget about 30 minutes of like high-level superficial feedback. We'll sometimes spend 30 minutes with an applicant just helping them design their why CBS response, that one question, or maybe why MBA and why CBS. And we'll get into a little bit of that today to the extent we can within 45 minutes, 55 minutes that we have in total together. We are offering a special discount for those in attendance today, 15% off of our interview prep. You could use the code GMATClub15 on our website. We do have Morgan Bernstein on our team. She's the former head of admissions at Berkeley Haas. I know that's not Columbia specific, but of course, as the head of admissions, not somebody who was just, there for a year or two or a junior level admissions team member. She actually ran the entire group, was affiliated with the school for 12 years, 9 or 10 of those in admissions. It's about as expert level and senior level a mentor, a coach, a consultant as you can have. And again, that expertise only naturally transcends just Haas. So she's available as well. Please feel free to sign up on our website or shoot me an email, greg@avantiprep.com, if you'd like to, talk about any of this. I know it's interview prep season and you're doing a lot of these for a lot of different schools, and GMAT Club is hosting this fantastic couple of weeks of prep. I think there are 3 more after this, and there have been several preceding. But just a few general reminders on MBA interviews, not CBS specific, but just reminders. Sorry if you've been hearing these at multiple calls, but I think they're worth going over. MBA interviews are usually by invitation. Of course, not always. Talk if you apply by certain dates, you get an interview. Darden has an open interview period. Duke Fuqua. There are exceptions to that. Mostly by invitation. CBS's interviews are by invitation. MBA interviews are typically going to be with a member of admissions, an alum, or a trained student. This is somewhere where you should look and research and try to identify patterns or see who your interview has been scheduled with. CBS, it's usually with a member of admissions. I think they'll even, I'm sorry, with an alum. They even say that on their website. There are exceptions to that. I'm going to make up these percentages, but I feel like maybe 10% of the time you'll see somebody interview with CBS with somebody from admissions. So usually an alum, to correct my trip there a second ago. CBS, it is usually with an alum, but it could be conceivably with a member of admissions or maybe even sometimes a student. Another thing you could look for pattern-wise is duration of interview. Columbia probably fits the average with this. I would say roughly 30 to 45 minutes for the entirety of the experience. If it's 45 minutes from start of call to end of call, there's going to be a few minutes at the beginning of hello, how are you, pleasantries. You should be ready for those, right? Like that's part of, it's not formally evaluative, but it's part of the impression and part of the experience. They will then ask you questions. They ask you answer, they ask you answer, they ask you answer. And at the end, you'll have an opportunity to ask them questions. When you look through GMAT Club's interview reports on this page, which is a fantastic resource, you will often see people write down or note down, I don't see any here, but sometimes they'll write down how long the interview was. Total time was around 45 minutes. The last 10 or 15 was for questions. I would say that's fairly typical for CBS. Just watch out though, if it's with an alum and you get a really warm and chatty alum, maybe it's a weekend, maybe they're done with work for the day. It could go a little bit longer. I think with alums, there's a little more variability or potential for variability in terms of both duration and in terms of question type. Sometimes alumni could go a little more rogue than like somebody from admissions or even a trained student who are more apt to stay kind of to the book, whatever kind of interview questions they're instructed to provide. Columbia's interviews are resume only. There are some, again, exceptions to this. MIT Sloan, NYU Stern, they will have read your entire application. Harvard, of course, has read your entire application as well. Research the school, its interview format, its interview reports. We just talked about some of that. This is kind of a joking phrase that I a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think important. Ahead of each school's interview, inhale the propaganda of that school. Again, tongue in cheek. What does it mean? It means really pour yourself into the values, the resources, the news, why it fits for you, different conversations that you've had with that school. If you have multiple interviews in a given, February can get really busy for interview prep. We have clients who apply to 6, 7, 8 schools, and they're doing 6, 7, 8 interviews. And it becomes a little bit of a planning process for them and with them to space these out. Some schools will let you go into a Calendly type portal and book an interview 3-4 weeks away. Others, somebody from an alum will interview and say, are you free in 5 days? So you want to space them out a little bit to the extent you can so that you can adapt and customize and render your prep school specific. Pour yourself into the resources of the school, identify the different quirks that exist between schools. You want to do that between each. Don't underestimate the importance of your interview. It is one more data point. It's not all or nothing. I know from an experience standpoint, it feels like I got through the application stage and now I'm doing the interview and it's all or nothing for the interview. That's not true. It's one more data point. It's very important. It should be given its proper due and proper respect, and you want to perform well. But it is something that these schools take and kind of put into the rest, reevaluate you in the aggregate. You should dress in business formal attire for suit and tie or the equivalent, unless, that word unless, explicitly permitted otherwise. If a school explicitly says business casual is okay, then business casual is okay. Otherwise, it's business formal. I feel like, and I've said this other videos like this, I feel like I get either pushback on that or people sort of question it more and more over the years. That is still true. I have former clients who are interviewers at these schools, and they tell me they will mark people down if they were kind of oblivious to the fact that an MBA interview deserves business formal dress. You'd also rather just be overdressed than underdressed. These are conversational, but they're not a two-way conversation. You'll hear that term conversational. That more means it's conversational in tone, usually, meaning the interviewer is not there to trip you up or trick you or intimidate you. They're usually fairly friendly, and they want to set you up for success. And they want to get to know you and have you do your best. It's not conversational like a two-way conversation, though. Pleasantries in the beginning, 20 to 30 minutes of them asking you questions. And then at the end, you ask them questions. It's not, a dinner or something where you each ask each other questions 50-50 the whole way through. Look up the interviewer in advance if you can see who they are. That's not always the case. But if you can, that will help you know, are they an alum? Are they AdCom? You can look them up on LinkedIn. This can influence the questions you ask at the end of the interview. Avoid, being overly me-centric in the interview, of course, self-aggrandizing. Be specific but succinct. This is something I was joking with the moderators at the beginning, when we were offline before this. I got to remind myself to do this oftentimes for videos like this, right? How do you balance specificity and succinctness in an interview? You're for a question like why CBS, or why Columbia Business School, you want to be very, very specific, but you got to get that into like 2.5 minutes, maybe 3 at the high end. Your longest response in these interviews, your average response is probably going to be 2 to 2.5 minutes. Your longest response should probably be something like 3 minutes for Columbia Business School, for most schools' interviews. Get on the video early if it's a video, make sure everything's working and so forth. Eye contact, try to create the sensation of eye contact. If you're looking at the person interviewing you, you could kind of shrink their face 2 inches by 2 inches, 3 inches by 3 inches, and then try to put it just below your camera so that when you're looking at them, you create the sensation of eye contact. You don't want to be too close. You don't want to be too far away or too kind of meek. So think about things like that. Turn your phone off. Write a thank you note, absolutely, after the interview. And don't ask how you did. I almost feel silly putting that in there, but it does come up once or twice a year. When do I ask how I did? You never ask how you did. It would be kind of off-putting and inappropriate, so avoid that. As we go through the Columbia specific questions, I would like you to keep these 4 buckets or categories of questions in mind. These are our own buckets. These are not like Columbia's formal labels for these questions. The origin of these 4 categories, I mean, these are terms that are, of course, used in the industry. I didn't come up with, behavioral questions is not my term. It's just, but this way of breaking down interviews is something we've used for many years now. And it's the idea behind it is to, if it's your first interview or your first time doing this, you might look up the questions over here in the interview reports, and especially for schools that ask more questions, you say, oh my goodness, this feels somewhat overwhelming. How do I organize this? How do I organize my preparation around this? Well, we can break these questions up into 4, maybe 5 different buckets, and we'll do that when we look at the specific. We could break them up into these buckets, and then we can identify patterns for each school within each bucket. Which schools ask more behavioral questions? Which schools ask fewer? Which schools really lean into self-awareness questions? Which schools don't? How do schools open the interview? Do they tend to open it with in a traditional way or in a different way? Do they ask any kind of curveball or oddball questions? We'll see all of this live for CBS in a moment. Common points of variance. I think I just kind of, rattled off a few of these. What are the differences in duration or style? How consistent do a school's interview questions seem to be? You will, if you go to interview points, if you're interviewing with Berkeley Haas, my own alma mater, in recent years, you will find that Berkeley Haas's interview questions are very, very consistent from interviewer to interviewer. For CBS, I would say they're somewhat consistent, but there's some variation. And again, it's an alum, so they have some degree of training to interview you, but they can go kind of on their own a little bit more. I mentioned what are preferred openers for a certain school, how many behaviorals, and what kind of behaviorals do they usually ask, common one-offs or tendencies, and so on and so forth. Here are some of the more common Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, I would say, are the three big ones in terms of like non-traditional. Harvard, Stanford, Wharton are the three biggest non-traditional MBA interviews. Stanford really focuses or orients around a series of behavioral questions and probes deeply throughout those. Darden, a little bit different as well. But Columbia fits, I think, more in the kind of traditional pattern, 30 to 45 minutes, blind, only your resume, usually an alum. This is a little bit unique, by the way, in terms of timing. Columbia Business School, whereas most schools, they do your interview, and then there's a big kind of decision release date that everyone, or around that date, most people hear. Columbia will try to give you a decision within 2 weeks of receiving the completed interview report. They usually receive the completed interview report within a week of the actual interview. So there's a little bit of a quicker timeline here for Columbia. So that's just an interesting logistical element. They do ask the classic opening question. We'll see that more in a moment. The core questions, we'll see what we mean by core questions, are all there, but with some possibility of variation in exact order or patterns. I would say Columbia is fairly light on what I call self-awareness questions. I mean, I say that almost with a pause because the whole interview is really related to self-awareness. But as far as the category, the specific category of self-awareness questions, we see Columbia being a little bit lighter there, maybe focusing more on what's your leadership style above all in that category. 1 to 3 behaviorals, a heightened focus. This is huge. I think this is huge right now, and it's very big for a school like Columbia. A heightened underlying focus on post-MBA career placement. Can you reliably place and confidently place into, in their eyes, the post-MBA goals that you articulated in your application in that big, long Columbia Essay 1, and now here in your interview? Are you truly a competitive candidate to place into those roles? They don't want people floundering in the job market when they graduate. So the heightened emphasis on that. You therefore want to showcase in your interview or build a case around why you believe you can succeed in recruiting, and what resources you'll use from CBS to do that. New York City is a huge part of that. Why New York City? Not just for recruiting, but just in general for why CBS. These are underlying themes that you will want to make sure you build into and bake into your interview prep for Columbia. Be ready for this too. This is a little bit of a Columbia specific one-off. Duke, Fuqua, and Columbia are the two schools that I've seen in the last decade ask this quite often. Tendency-wise, I would say I'm seeing Columbia ask it a little bit less this year than in preceding years, but the probabilities are still significant enough that you want to and definitely should be prepared for something like, where else did you apply? Or these get worded differently in real life, but like, where else did you apply? How did you pick these schools? And where does CBS rank within this list? That's a pretty blunt question. They are not shy about, wanting to know where they stack in your list. And if they, make you an offer, are you going to accept? Let's hop over to this Columbia question bank. This is not official. It does not purport to be exhaustive. Again, we have no idea what your interviewer could go totally wrong, right? It's not official from Columbia. It does not purport to be exhaustive. It does not purport to be in like the exact order that you're going to get these, but it is based entirely on real life interview reports. And I would offer a word of advice for Columbia and for other schools. You could look around the internet. You could use ChatGPT or whatever you want to ask what are the most common. I still find those to be sloppy. In fact, I would not, if I asked ChatGPT what are the most common Columbia MBA interview questions, I actually would not trust the answers, because what it's pulling from in the like internet ether is I find wildly inaccurate or just doesn't get updated. The best resource is this. It's the GMAT Club interview debriefs. Clear Admit has something comparable called interview reports. Check out GMAT Club first, of course, but those are the two main. Those are the two. You'll get a few interview reports from each round. They're current, they're recent. That's where I would triangulate my preparation if I want to look at real life interview reports. And that's kind of where this comes from. Let's go through this, right? Again, these categories are my own. These categories are our own, and it's a way of just organizing your thought and prep. Now, in a presentation like this, we're not here to go through, there's not kind of room or space in a dialogue of this size to go through how to answer each of these questions. I did do a video for GMAT Club last year, how to answer the most common MBA interview questions, and that's available through this link. And there might be a way to grab that and post that, or just Google how to answer the most common MBA interview questions, and look for this one with me from GMAT Club last year. So we're not going to go through how to answer all of these. What we're doing for purposes of this conversation is we're going to run through and identify Columbia specific patterns where they might exist, and we'll go a little bit into allude somewhat to how to answer these, and then we'll come to your questions, and maybe more of this will come up. More question specific questions will come up during the Q&A. Columbia, I would say for the most part, asks the classic opening question for MBA interviews. This does not mean with 100% certainty that that's how they're going to open your interview, but it's, look around the interview reports. You're going to see this as a pretty high probability opener. Something like, tell me about yourself, or walk me through your resume, or introduce yourself. I personally treat walk me through your resume and tell me about yourself as the same thing. I think they are code for give me 2 minutes about you. Like, I don't know you, I've never met you. They're not going to say it that way, but like, what's the movie trailer on who you are? A little bit about your, my name again is Greg. I grew up in, like, a little bit about your background, where you went to, where you studied, why you chose that school, why you chose your major, any other highlights about your kind of uni days, what you were involved in. There's that piece. Maybe job one. How did you transition into that? Why did you pursue that job? What does the company do? What do you do? Maybe one highlight. Synthesize that down. Maybe you had a second job. Do the same thing. Why did you switch jobs? What does the company do if it's not obvious? What do you do in that role? 1 or 2 highlights. And then outside of work, who are you? There's like 4 parts you could kind of walk through. It gets a little more complicated if you've had 5 different jobs. All right, then you got to do a real aggregation. If there's something more unique about your background, you were, raised in a multi-generational household, raised by your grandparents, moved around, lived in 3 different countries. You could put a little more emphasis on things like that. The challenge here with this is don't fall in the trap of talking for 5, 8, 10 minutes. You're going to lose the listener from the beginning. They're going to think you don't have kind of interview or social professional awareness. This is a 2 to 2.5, probably hard max 3-minute opener. And even 3 probably feels a little long, but that's why we practice it out loud. And if you all want to do that, we're here for interview prep. We could grab a slot next week. High probability opener, just to throw it out there for other schools like NYU Stern, the other big New York-based school, they open a little differently. We see them open oftentimes with either proudest accomplishment or something from your pick 6. MIT Sloan, a lot of times, will open by saying, do you have any updates since you've applied? You can find these patterns. I think 80% of schools, you're going to see something like this, but you'll be able to find these patterns for CBS and for others. There's always the possibility for any school, I think oftentimes coming out of a tell me about yourself question, for industry probing or resume or experience probing, they might grab a bullet from your resume. Tell me more about blank on your resume. Tell me more about this extracurricular, something you maybe mentioned briefly in your opening, and they want to probe into that. Columbia used, for many, many, many years, Columbia paired their interviewers with their interviewees based on industry. And we used to see a lot of industry-specific conversation and probing. That's still good to have in your head, and I would definitely still be ready for that. You might even hope, how great would it be if the person interviewing you is from your industry or your target industry? What nice overlap. Now, in practice, I don't see as much of that industry-specific pairing with CBS in recent years as they've moved more toward like a Calendly style automated scheduling system. It used to be very kind of manual, but be ready for the questions that you see here, these kind of probes, right? Anything on your they will only have seen your resume, but anything you say, anything on that resume is certainly fair game. Be ready to speak to those. These core questions, I usually call them core, sometimes a little bit of a core plus, meaning a school might ask one or two extras within this. They are really, what are your goals? Why MBA? Why now? Why that school? And how would you uniquely contribute? I would say Columbia has solid probability or potential to ask any of these classics, and you want to be ready for all of them. Some nuances within this, of course, that we'll want to go through, and to maybe quickly rattle off approach. For goals, of course, make them consistent with your application. Think about, what are your short-term goals? What are your long-term goals? Sometimes you might even have a medium-term goal in there. You might articulate the whole kind of plan or trajectory, but short-term goals, long-term goals, and what is the passion or purpose behind those goals? This response should include, especially for short-term goals, which not just what's your target industry, but like, what are your target companies, target roles, in what geographies? Proactively include those in the response. If you see in interview reports questions like what kind of companies are you targeting, or what industry are you targeting, or that usually means the person failed to include those facts in the original response. Make sure that they're in your original response. And again, pay attention, keep this in the back of your mind, this heightened underlying focus on post-MBA career placement. This is especially important for Columbia. I've seen Columbia focused on this for years. Again, I have former clients who are interviewers, alumni interviewers now for CBS. And, hey, there's a heightened focus on this. Columbia anecdotally moved somebody who was in the career department into admissions. So now there's more frontline eyeballs on viability of post-MBA goals. It's especially important in this kind of political market in the United States, where there's noise around visa sponsorship and H-1B. You could even weigh and customize whether you might be ready for a plan B question. I don't see it all the time for Columbia, but I've listed it down here. What's your plan B if you can't achieve your primary post-MBA goals? Have that in your head, whether overtly asked or not. Go into the interview ready for that. If you're targeting MBB consulting in the US, well, what if hiring's down, and what if there's noise around H-1B, visa sponsorship and what have you? Like, what's your backup plan? Are you open to other geographies? Are you certified to work in other geographies? What would you look at, either industry-wise or job-wise or geography-wise? So as a plan B. Sometimes a plan B response includes a plan B and a plan C. Show specificity and layers of thought with these backup plans. Don't get tripped up by the question, and rather be ready for it by portraying thought, research, specificity, and kind of implying confidence or creating confidence in the eye of the interviewer that you would be able to achieve these goals, and that they would still kind of accrue toward your interests and probably your eventual long-term goals. Be ready, of course, for why MBA and why now. The why now piece, I actually see CBS ask maybe a little bit less, but you'll still see it, right? Like, here's why now. There's no why now here. There's no why now here. You still want to be ready for why now. Why MBA? Why now? Well, think of it like this. Here's a slide. If these are my long-term goals, and I just told you my long-term goals, maybe in a previous response, short-term goals, I just told you my goals in a response, short-term, long-term, and the why behind those goals. Well, here's my why MBA. This is where I want to go. Well, as I think ahead to these goals, I've already have a solid foundation or a relevant foundation in A, B, and C. This might be preface to your response. The response is why MBA. It's not why are you ready for, the question is why MBA. It's not why are you going to get these jobs, but you still want to highlight a little bit of relevance, a little bit of preface, make yourself sound credible and ready to kind of achieve those goals. As I look ahead to these goals, assuming you've already articulated them, I feel that I have a relevant foundation in A and B and C. But in order to achieve these goals, I'm missing X, Y, Z, or on this slide, E, F, G. Putting it in blocks like this is intended to invite you or encourage you to really crystallize the different pieces of the why MBA for you. The first big reason I need an MBA is, and then elaborate on that. The second big reason is, and then elaborate on that. The third big reason is, and then elaborate on that. Make each of the why MBA pillars specific, concrete, specific to you. Make them different from one another, right? We don't want to just highlight all hard skills for these buckets. One bucket might be hard skills, but don't just say hard skills. Describe them more specific to your job or your intended post-MBA goals. One of these might be related to personal and leadership growth, personal leadership development. Another might be related to like network recruiting and career placement. But you got to kind of figure out what's right for you. If the question is why MBA, I personally would not put, if the question is definitely asked as why MBA, not combined with why Columbia, I would just leave it at why MBA. I would not yet bring in why Columbia. They're going to ask that question probably next. Or at the very end of your why MBA, you could say something like, and I'm also happy to share why I believe Columbia is, the best fit. Why Columbia? Similar logic, right? Now, like, it's just an extension of this. If these are my gaps that I need to fill through an MBA, why is Columbia uniquely suited to fill those gaps? I would once again consider, right? Like these answers, if you just give them off the top of your head, they can get a little bit messy and run-ons and hard to follow. Try to give yourself, crystallize 3 reasons or something. Could be two, could be 4, whatever it is. Try to crystallize your reasons why CBS. Make them different. Be really specific within each of those. I actually see CBS, some kind of interview feedback that I feel and get. I would say they're looking for even more specificity than some other schools. All schools are looking for specificity within this response. Again, here I mentioned a little bit earlier for goals. If you're seeing questions like what specific clubs do you hope to join, what courses do you want to take, what do you want to participate in, why New York City? Like, you probably shouldn't, unless they wanted to go deeper into one of those. All of these should be in your original answer to why Columbia. If you're getting a follow-up, it's like, well, okay, but tell me more about courses and clubs and professors. That's basically the interviewer telling you, like, I was hoping to have heard that in your why CBS answer. You didn't give it to me, so now I'm going to give you another chance for it. The challenge here again is to organize all of these different things: courses, professors, centers, clubs, extracurriculars, case competitions, leadership development opportunities, why New York City, executives in residence, speakers, job shadowing, in-semester internships. How do you don't have to cover all of those things, but how do you organize those into a specific but succinct, overall maybe 2.5, max 3-minute response? That's the challenge. That's what we work with applicants on. And you can see why, if we were really doing this and building it with you, you could spend 30 minutes just on that, to build it kind of wisely, right? The first time you build it, it's going to be a little messy. It's going to be too long. You're going to practice it out loud, and it's going to be like 4 minutes, and it's too much detail. Try to strike that balance. I don't mean to imply either here that you should not be laundry listing everything. It's not a contest who knows the most about CBS, but there should be specificity within your answer. The answer should be both, there should be specificity to it as well as feel. So don't just rattle off or laundry list things. What's the feel? What's the emotional connection that you feel with CBS? Why is its culture, so right for you? And New York City absolutely should be a big part of that. I find in practice for this question, the location, New York City, it can either be addressed as a pillar on its own. So like if you're covering three main things about why CBS, maybe one of them is more like academic and hard skill and job prep. Another one is more personal leadership growth, and another is location. It could be its own pillar, or it could be something that underlies or amplifies everything else that you described, which in truth it does. Think about what you could do at CBS that you can't do anywhere else. Almost anywhere else, but anywhere else. Who's going to be teaching your courses? Columbia has massive course lists, and a lot of them are taught by leading industry practitioners. Where else are you going to get that? Think of the speakers who could come to campus, how active and voluminous their alumni network is in New York. They're coming up to campus, and you could go do job shadowing. How are you going to take advantage of that? In-semester internships, where viable, are more common and popular at a place like CBS because of the proximity. So just think about who are the executives and residents at CBS. Like New York is such an amplifier of like everything about academically, professionally, recruiting, socially, personal and leadership growth. So again, you could go on and on and on about that. Watch out for variations within these questions. You're not always going to get these, like you're not always going to get what are your goals and then why MBA and then why Columbia. You could get, and you'll see in these interview reports, combinations. Why MBA, why Columbia? Okay, what are you going to do? Look at that. Look, that's a perfect example. They did not ask goals, and then they hybridized why MBA, why Columbia. You have to be ready so you prepare for each on its own. But in the real day of the interview, listen for the question. Did they skip any? Well, I haven't shared my goals yet. Okay, if I haven't shared my goals yet, and I kind of need them to know that to answer to an extent why MBA and why Columbia, do I briefly preface with my goals, like one sentence, two sentences at the very beginning of this, just so they have the context? Just briefly, so you're aware of my goals. Very brief. You're not giving a 2-minute answer about that like you would if it was a standalone question. You're giving kind of a 2-sentence version, or you're baking it into your why MBA somewhere else. In this construct, you are probably going to answer why MBA and then transition into why Columbia, or you're going to merge why MBA, why Columbia kind of together. You just have to watch out for length. In this construct, I would probably still tackle them separately. I would do my why MBA and then my why Columbia, but I would preface with my goals very briefly, 2 sentences. I would condense my why MBA a little bit, and I would keep my kind of fulsome answer on why Columbia. You got to watch out for those combos, and the combos could be all sorts of combos. Why MBA, why CBS, why now? What are your short-term goals, and how can CBS help you achieve them? That's goals hybridized with why CBS. Watch out for the variations. Be ready for them. How would you uniquely contribute to the CBS community? You'll see this asked in a variety of different ways. How do you plan on enriching the experience of your cluster? How will you engage? What kind of contributions will you make? I would walk in. This is not a universally asked question for CBS. I've kind of thrown this rough indication of 2 stars down instead of 3 here, but I would walk into any interview being ready to, and you had an essay 3 for Columbia, very similar. How would you co-create, your experience, which has big time contribution vibes to it? Be ready for this. Be ready to go through specifics. It can be in the classroom or in your cluster. It could be outside your cluster in the community. I usually think, people here again, either think of 3 things, or maybe a major, and a minor. Make the contributions really specific. Make them different from one another. If one is more professional, make the other more leadership-y or personal. Maybe the minor one is a little bit more fun, related to a hobby you do. How are you going to take advantage of New York City? Are you going to lead something out into like the city if it's around a certain interest or like area of intellectual or hobby kind of growth that you want to share with others? Look up and come up with that. With those ideas. Don't just say I'm going to join blank club. It's not just I'm going to join such and such a club. It's what role do you seek in that club? And in that leadership role, what are you actually going to do or create or improve upon? This and your why Columbia response are predicated in a way on a certain level of knowledge and ideally even interaction with Columbia and the areas of interest that you have. I mentioned Plan B. What biggest challenge do you expect to face at CBS? This is like that's probably, I don't know, 0 to 30% probability question. Just have it flagged. We can't go through every single thing here. We'll come to questions in about 5 minutes, and we'll do about 10 minutes there on questions. What is your leadership style? So self-awareness questions. This is, again, my own categorization. Self-awareness questions for MBA interviews. I would usually say, be ready for? What is your leadership style? What role do you typically play in a team? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And what words would your colleagues or managers or whomever use to describe you? That's kind of a standard non-school specific baseline. Now, for each school, you'll be able to identify patterns. Who leans into these more than others? NYU Stern, I brought them up a little while ago. They lean pretty heavily into this category. I would say if you look at the patterns of the Columbia interview, they kind of don't. Now, don't take that to mean Columbia's not interested in self-awareness. Of course they are. The whole thing is related to self-awareness. But as far as this label of questions, I don't see a ton. You should still be ready for these. Any MBA interview, I would be ready for these. But I see more of an emphasis here. What is your leadership style? What type of leader are you? Can you describe your leadership style and share a story that represents it? That kind of thing. I usually say to people here, brand it. Say what your leadership style is. Don't bury the lead. Label it. Describe it. Elaborate on it. Here's what I mean by that. A couple of sentences. And then even if they don't ask for a supporting example, give a mini example. Not a whole big 2-minute example, but a mini example. Watch out for some of these as well. What are good practices to work in teams? I've seen these a little bit for Columbia. Well, how would you react in a team that wasn't working well? That's more of a hypothetical behavioral. How would you react? But you could sometimes describe how you would react. You might be able to support that with a mini example as well. Here's a time that actually happened. Behavioral questions. Behavioral questions basically means tell me about a time when. Share an example of. They're example specific questions. And you can see examples here. Behavioral is a space where if you click through enough interview reports, you'll almost be able to put probabilities around the different ones you see for different schools. In theory, behavioral questions are it's kind of theoretically endless. They can tell me about a time you failed. Tell me about a time you changed your mind. Tell me about a time you gave feedback. It could be any of these kind of things, but you usually can find some patterns. Tell me about a time you led a team for Columbia. And again, you see different possible wordings in here. Maybe something about making a team more inclusive, overcoming a challenge, receiving feedback, navigating conflict or disagreement. What you can and should do here is build a mental bench of examples. A lot of people will put a table together, or a list okay, overcame a challenge. What's my main story for that? Maybe a backup story as well. Failed. What's my main story for that? What's a backup? Led a team. What's my main story for that? What's a backup? Received feedback. What's my main story? What's a backup? Get that ready. And now for each of those, be ready. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is a version of the STAR approach. The beginning of the story is the situation, sometimes the challenges. They should be pretty brief, probably 20 seconds. This whole answer is probably 2.5 minutes, maybe 2, high-end 3, we'll say 2 to 2.5. Middle, action, action, action. First, I did this, then we did this, then we did this. Again, balance, specificity, and succinctness. Don't just make it sound superficial like you waved a magic wand and everything was great. Walk through some of the actions, but don't bury them in details they don't need. The end is the result or the outcome. Sometimes for that, there could be kind of a short-term or immediate outcome. Maybe there's a long-term outcome too, or a bigger impact, cultural impact that the story had. And I like to throw a lesson on the back of this, or an insight, or an extrapolation. I call this the Scarl approach. And we could practice more of that if we were to work together. Last couple of minutes here before we roll over to questions. Always be ready, and I do see it for Columbia. What is your proudest accomplishment? Be ready for a personal or professional version. They sometimes will specify what's your proudest professional accomplishment. Then you have to give professional. If they don't specify, have a plan and know which one you're gonna do. What, am I gonna use a personal one or a professional one? I would say for this, what did you do and why is it so important to you? So to me, it's not quite a behavioral question. It's not quite a SCARL. It's like, what did you do? Maybe there's like a synthesized SCARL up here, but I'm more interested in this why. Why is it your proudest accomplishment? Maybe there are two interesting reasons why. What do you do outside of work? Try to hit, different topics or themes with this, show other sides or kind of roundedness to you, different categories. Where else did you apply? We might take that one over to the questions. Do you have any questions for me? This, I don't see a ton. Some schools ask this as like their last question to you before you ask them questions. But is there anything else you'd like to cover, add, or share? I think of it as a safety valve question. If it is asked, literally like if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I forgot to cover, I didn't adequately cover location. Don't say that out loud. But like you said, earlier in our conversation, we talked a lot about CBS and all the reasons I'm so interested in CBS. One point I don't think I fully emphasized is just how important location is. And then you could go into your answer for that. Go smooth, but be smooth into it. Maybe you didn't get to talk about the contributions you hope to make there. Earlier in our conversation, we talked a lot about why CBS. I'd love to take a moment to share how I believe I can uniquely contribute. So it's a safety valve. It's a kind of an open end. Don't just leave it though. Even if you've already think you've covered everything, then use it as an opportunity to just reinforce, reiterate, and summarize in kind of an emotional, or quasi, not emotional, like that kind of emotional, but like an emotional connection for all the reasons described, from blank to blank to blank to blank to blank to blank. I really and truly feel that you could kind of close that way. Questions from crowd. Do you want to pick or should I just grab and go?
No, I'll do that, Greg. But first of all,
Sure.
thank you so much for the whole presentation. It was really insightful. We do have a lot of questions and a few really interesting ones. So I'll start with the first one that we have. How can a candidate prove that they thrive in NYC's high-intensity environment without sounding transactional or losing the collaborative appeal Columbia value in its clusters?
Very interesting. Very good, thoughtful question. Philosophical almost. Okay, so things that go through my head here are, one thing would be, are there any connections you have? So if you were talking in a YCBS response about location, is there anything related to where you're from or what you've done to this point, or situations or atmospheres that you've been able to thrive in or build community in? I don't know if you're from a big city elsewhere in the world, or a big company, and within that company, you were able to build community within this kind of big place that it's easy to get lost. Like you could, I don't know what those connections would be for this person individually, but if there are any points of connectivity like that, and you could, it's going to sound like spin, but you could probably find those no matter what. So even if you were from like a rural place, you could say, well, I'm going to carry that focus on community and relationship that I've always was kind of brought up with or imbued upon me. That's so central to who I am that I'm going to be able to carry it to this kind of, busier place. That would be more on the personal connection side. I think in terms of like why CBS and how some of these things amplify the experience in terms of who your professors are, who speakers are, in semester internships, recruiting, recruiters. Some of that is inherently more transactional, but the way that you say it doesn't need to be transactional. So I hate to say that part might come down to how you say it. I think you could also maybe get a little bit of a, I think Columbia has these interesting dichotomies to it, both in terms, like one of the dichotomies I always think of is that the power of its local location, New York City, and yet at the same time, its global reach. That's not directly applicable here, but that's an interesting dichotomy to Columbia. Both of those can exist and coexist and are part of the value proposition for Columbia. More to the question, you could have, I think part of the magical dichotomy of Columbia is also those collaborative values and cluster system and connectivity exist alongside all of the kind of seas of opportunity of New York City. So I think you could find ways around those themes. Other question, there's a question there about, is it recorded? Yes, it will be available, I believe, on YouTube afterward. And somebody answered that. Nikhil answered.
Yes. Second question again by Supriya. How do we make a career vision feel uniquely Columbia rather than interchangeably with other M7s? What aligns an unconventional journey with CBS's specific?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like. I don't know what the exact goals are here, but the goals or the career vision, I don't find need to vary that. Sometimes yes, sometimes yes. So as we do adapt, we work with clients, and they might have tweak the career goals a little bit for a certain school. But I feel like the backbone of somebody's career vision, there's not like a hyper focus to like. I don't think like the whole career vision is necessarily changing. There might be little adjustments and points of emphasis within it, or maybe words here and there that you use to describe it. I don't think that like the core career goal or career vision is changing that much. Again, with some exception. I mean, like if it were MIT doesn't even ask about goals. Like Stanford, sometimes you might, we do a little bit more adaptation there because you're tailoring to like the jobs that people from Stanford actually graduate into. I don't think there's not, and I don't think they're really looking for like, are these goals so hyper? I think it's more how you're going to get to the goal. Now, a little tailoring to more practical tailoring. I mean, if you're going into certain industries, and New York City is the perfect place for those industries, that could be a very important point of emphasis. If you're going to place to a certain industry that has offices in many different areas, and you're interested in the New York City office, you could say the reasons why. So I think the sub points within the broader career vision yes, they can. But I don't think the top line career vision, with except I'd almost have to like hear the case to opine more completely. But for the most part, I think career vision and the general direction of that are going to be consistent. And then it's the underlying, like, okay, what office, why New York, of course, why MBA and why CBS. Well, that will be tailored to CBS and its location and its resources and its recruiting patterns. And I'd be happy to check. That's another really good, two really good questions right there.
Happy to more from Rio, but we'll come to that later. First, we'll just cover from some other people. So they're asking, if you were recently laid off within the last 2 weeks, should you mention it in an interview?
Ooh, tough one. Okay, so one thing I would, if a client came to me with this question, sometimes people have situations where, you might have been it might be communicated that you've been laid off, but you're technically with the company through the end of the month, and that kind of flows past the point of the interview. And in that case, you could probably just leave it alone, because on kind of a technical, like you're still officially employed there. If you are physically no longer there, it does get a little trickier, because you do not want to be in a situation where you intentionally mislead. If you're really fully like out of the job now, and there's no way around that, you may have to kind of weave that in, right? Like if it's tell me about yourself, or tell me what do you like and dislike about your current job. You started to get into this area of like you would be communicating inaccuracies if you were to speak of it in the present tense or not say that. Now, a way to get in front of that might be you have to have a conversation really about like, should I be updating admissions about this separately? And maybe do that before the interview, so that it is not coming as a surprise exclusively through the interview. You want to think about how to word that, and the right way to word that. I think for the most part, admissions and proactively articulate your plan for what you're going to do. Well, maybe you were planning to leave in May or June anyway, and this just accelerated a little bit. Maybe there was, reduction in your whole department got laid up, right? Like you got to make sure, like, all the messaging. This was not due to my personal performance, explain it. It's not due to like you weren't like, you didn't get in trouble or perform poorly. What were the circumstances surrounding it? What do you plan to do between now and and when you enroll in order to kind of continue to improve your experiences and prepare even for your goals? This might have been unfortunate, but it actually accelerated your pre-MBA prep timeline by 3 months. And now you're actually going to be able to go take those, pre-consulting or pre-investment training the street, if it's investment bank, like a pre-MBA internship. Instead of a 2-month pre-MBA internship, you can do a 4-month pre-MBA. Look for ways to kind of message it correctly and constructively. I think schools understand in this environment, and they're kind of forgiving of, about those things. Just make sure you word it and explain it to admissions and to your interviewer in the right way. And again, my first instinct here would be, if it just happened or it's just been communicated to you, is there a way? I had a situation with this with a client last year. Is there a way that, like, you're technically employed through the interview, post-interview, maybe through Fed? In March, you may have to, at some point, depending on the timing, you may actually have to make this communique to admissions. That way they do background checks and you're like not there anymore. You got to, be forthcoming. But there are ways to message it correctly, and you got to figure out the right timing given your own circumstances.
We're almost on time, Greg, so we'll just take one last question. On the flip side, any advice for NYC locals standing out and connecting to CPS personally with that?
Yeah, I'm thinking of 2 things here. One would be things you hopefully would have already done, and another would have been things that that you could maybe bring up in the interview. Things you already would have, could have, should have done. I mean, if you remember back to your CBS application, CBS, more so than many other schools, had 1 or 2 boxes in the beginning of the app that said, who have you spoken with? What events have you attended? Students, alumni, AdCom. If you're in New York City, they have already expected you, and it will look, unfortunately negative if you didn't engage actively and wholeheartedly with the school. You should have been up on campus, ideally 1 or 2 times. I actually think their healthcare conference is today. We work with clients in the New York market applying to Columbia. One of them who's interested in healthcare, she's attending the healthcare conference today. There are ways to do that and to already have shown this pattern of connection and genuine interest. So that, I guess that bed is already made. In an interview, if you have certain interests in the city, or maybe you were new to the city and then you had to adjust, and now you could do that for others. If you have certain interests or networks professionally, personally, that you could kind of roll into, ways you could contribute or enhance the experience of your cluster or classmates, those are things that you could kind of look for and search for. I should say too, go back to that question toward the end about where else have you applied and why CBS? And if you live in New York City and you really want to do your MBA in New York City, or you live in the area, or CBS is just your top choice, period, get that, you could find ways to get that into the interview, either as direct response to where does CBS line up for your preferences, or as a, within your CBS, within your YCBS.
Greg, do you mind one more question maybe?
Sure, there's a tough one. I'll try to get a couple of minutes in here. Okay, where else did we apply and where did CBS rank in that list? First, the easier version of this is when CBS really is like the highest and most favored school for you in there. Then say where else you applied, reiterate why. Okay, even if they just say where else have you applied, in effect, the question is asking, where else have you applied? Why did you choose those schools? And where does CBS rank in that list? So have all those parts in there, even if it's worded a little bit differently. When you think about those whys, you could walk through some of the key pillars of why. And I think what you're working toward is, in effect, why CBS is the best fit across all those different whys. To reiterate again that CBS is your highest and most favorite school in there. It gets a little trickier, of course, though, when you have other, you applied to Harvard and Wharton also. Now, I think that if it can sound like baloney, if you say, like, you don't want to say, like, yeah, I applied to like Harvard, Wharton, Columbia, and like name 2 or 3 other schools, but Columbia is absolutely my top choice. And like, I've even had students, tell me their interviewer was like, come on, man, really? Like, so I think they know. I think a school like CBS knows. They're definitely interested in where they stand. But like, if you also applied, or like your profile is such that like you're coming from like top tier private equity and like, whatever the gold or platinum profile stuff that we'll read about in the GMAT Club forums, you don't want to sound misleading or like you're BSing them here, and I think that can have a negative impact on you. So I mean, there's the easy case again where CBS truly is kind of the top choice. You can walk through that. If you've really applied to other, I think you could pretty easily make a case if you're really interested in CBS and you're super focused on New York. Maybe Harvard, Stanford, Wharton are probably the only other schools somebody would like. If you have, of course, some people like Booth better, some people like Berkeley better, some people like MIT better, but like Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, I think would more universally be like, yeah, if the person gets in there, they're good. So you got to calibrate that a little bit for where else you actually applied. You don't want to like bring up that gold or platinum profile again. If you have that profile, good on you. But if you have that profile and you say, well, I've applied to Columbia, Booth, and Tuck, it's not going to sound realistic. Again, that's another one where I can hear that voice of like, come on, man, really? Like that school, front office, top tier, bulge bracket investment banking, 2 years leading PE firm. Like, okay, really tell me where else you apply. So that takes a lot of thought and a lot of conversation, and it's hard to kind of distill into a universally applicable strategic answer for everybody. But sorry to not be able to go into perfectly tailored advice on that, but we're happy to, if you want to just flash up just to close the comments, if you could throw the presentation back up just for 1 second to close, just right here. Again, feel free to reach out. I know this is a few minutes over anyway, but like still, you always leave feeling like you wish you could have covered more or wish you could go through question by question. We check out the other presentations I've done for GMAT Club on how to answer the most common MBA interview questions. That's from last year. And if you do want more hands-on, specific, school-specific interview prep for Columbia Business School or others, we are feel free to reach out through our website or Greg at avantiprep.com. Shoot me an email. We can get that lined up. It could be for Columbia. It could be for other schools. We have this same level of, school versedness, school-specific versedness for really all of them. It's, you do so many of these over a decade, and you're able to kind of build that level of customization. We'd be happy to work with you on that. Myself, Morgan Bernstein, former head of admissions at Haas. But it's a pleasure to have had the chance to join you today. Thank you all for joining GMAT Club. And thank you to our hosts as well. Hope to see you again soon and wish you the best of luck with round 2 interview prep.
Thank you so much, Greg. It was lovely speaking to you and hearing your thoughts on this. And thank you so much for taking our time. We all know how busy the season is right now with the interview prep, so really appreciate that. And again, thank you everyone for joining in. I hope this was helpful and see you around in our next interview prep session. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.